On January 24, 2022, a 43-year-old woman reported to the police that she had been attacked by a man, whom she fortunately managed to escape. In her statement, she mentioned that a certain person had called her via social networks and offered her a job. However, when she arrived, she soon realized it was a trap, as the man mistreated her and also extorted money from her. Thanks to her statement, the police were able to arrest the suspect and uncover one of the worst criminals in the country, who had committed a series of heinous crimes that had long tormented the residents of neighboring houses in the city of El Alto. The whole world learned about the hidden identity behind the fake profiles. His name is Richard Choque Flores, a 33-year-old man believed to have over 70 victims. After his arrest, however, an even more disturbing truth came to light involving many more accomplices who supported Richard's actions. The media scandal that spread across the country and the world also angered the Bolivian public. Richard Choque Flores was born on November 9, 1988, in the city of El Alto, in the Pedro Domingo Murillo province of the La Paz department in Bolivia. As a child, he lived with his father, a policeman, his mother, a teacher, and his sister. He had a very ordinary childhood. Often, he could be seen coming and going in the company of his mother. Especially his mother appeared to them as an unfriendly person with whom they preferred not to speak anymore. When Richard was just 4 years old, his father was killed at work, and the family lost an important person. The trauma of his father's death began to manifest in the boy's strange behavior, which his mother could not control. Richard had practically no friends, and on weekends he sometimes visited one of his paternal cousins. The young man was named Fidel and was several years younger than him. When Richard spent time with Fidel, everything seemed to go smoothly. As a teenager, he attended a military academy but did not stay there long. It is not known why he decided to drop out of his studies. When he returned to his family's home, where he lived with his mother and sister under one roof, Richard showed some strange personality traits behind closed doors. But this had not yet worried anyone outside his family, at least until his cousin Fidel said he also wanted to study at a military academy. This turned out to be an opportunity for Richard, who had little experience in this field, to help him with the application. The young man promised his aunt and cousin that he would take care of the physical preparation so that Fidel could go to college smoothly, and that he would also prepare the necessary documents. For this purpose, his aunt gave him the sum of $5,000 to cover his tuition and expenses. On May 19, 2011, Fidel said goodbye to his mother and left his home with great enthusiasm to fulfill his dream. He met his cousin Richard in El Alto to travel together to Cochabamba, where the college was located. This was the last day Fidel and his mother spoke. Richard took the receiver and told her, at the urging of his aunt, who asked for a conversation with her son Bart, that Fidel was learning parachuting in Haiti and that he was doing well. He used this occasion to ask her to send him money and computer equipment so that Fidel could continue his studies. This whole situation was extremely suspicious, but the concern grew when Richard Choque Flores's face appeared in the national media in connection with the terrible crime he was accused of. On the afternoon of November 22, 2013, a girl named Blanca Rubili Ma went to the State University in El Alto, where she had been studying Jura for the past 2 years, as she had done every day. But on that day, Blanca did not return home. No one had any idea of her whereabouts until her mother Nancy received the worst news she could have expected the next day. From Blanca's mobile phone came the message that her daughter had been kidnapped, and that she would have to pay a ransom of $20,000 for her return. Moreover, the criminal warned her that he would kill her daughter if she informed the police. Nancy was desperate because it was impossible to raise such a sum, as she could not bear the pain of losing her daughter and wanted to give up. She turned to the Special Unit for Crime Fighting for help and began an intensive search for the girl. The authorities found out that Blanca had been contacted via social networks by a man named Mauricio Tiran, who claimed to be an instructor at a military academy. He convinced her to meet him to offer his help with her application for a study program. The search operation lasted about 9 days until the authorities, in collaboration with Nancy, implemented their plan. They told the kidnapper that they had left money in a hiding place on the street to save Blanca. When the man appeared at the spot where he thought the $20,000 would be, the police arrested him. It turned out that he had faked his real identity. It turned out to be the 25-year-old Richard Choque Flores. The investigators wasted no time and searched the house where the young man lived. When they arrived, their hope of finding Blanca alive was shattered. On November 29th, the girl's body was found buried in a blue jute sack in a grave. In the house, they also found several other women's IDs and even underwear. Because of these discoveries and the murders of Blanca, Richard Choque was sent to prison, where he awaited his trial, which would lead to a conviction. Based on the results of the autopsy of Blanca's body, it was determined that the girl had died of suffocation and had been hit on the head with an object that caused a skull injury. But to make matters worse, she had been brutally attacked by her assailant before she died. After this brutal crime, Richard Choque Flores was sentenced in 2015 to the maximum penalty of life imprisonment, which meant that he would have to spend 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole or house arrest. When his aunt, Fidelis's mother, learned on television of the crime her nephew had committed, her doubts and suspicions regarding her son's absence grew, and she began to visit him in prison, pleading with him to tell her where Fidel was, whom she had last seen in 2011. Faced with Richard's desperate silence, the woman decided to name him as a suspect in the young man's disappearance. However, instead of benefiting from this action, she only managed to provoke the anger of her nephew and his close relatives, who not only forbade her to visit him, but also followed her and threatened to kill her daughter, forcing the woman to leave the city and abandon the case for her own defense. In the meantime, Richard Choque was sent to prison, where he was supposed to spend 30 years, which unfortunately did not happen. As Richard sat behind bars, the people of Bolivia, and especially the proud El Alto, were spared the pain that the premature loss of Blanca had left in their lives for several years. However, on May 17, 2021, the city was shocked again by another disappearance. The story involves a 17-year-old girl, Lucy Maya Ramirez, who left her home that day and was never heard from again. She had disappeared until her mother received a message the next day demanding a ransom of $7,000 for Lucy, or she would be killed if the payment was not made. Along with the terrible message, the girl's family received a series of explicit photos showing what would happen to her if they did not transfer the money. The family had no way of raising such an amount. The same incident happened again a few months later. It was August 27, 2021, when 15-year-old Iris Maine Wilker did not return home. As in Lucy's case, the perpetrator demanded $7,000 to return her safe and sound. At the same time, the police continued to receive reports of women who had been victims of violence by a man who had deceived them with job promises via social networks. But the insatiable monster waiting for them on site had planned a completely different fate for them. Until finally, in early 2022, one of the victims managed to unmask him. On January 24th, law enforcement authorities arrested one of Bolivia's most dangerous criminals, none other than Richard Choque Flores, in a hotel. How could it happen that a criminal who was supposed to serve his sentence in prison was released and committed crimes again? The investigation that followed this case revealed the ineffectiveness and corruption of the justice system that should have ensured the safety of the victims, thereby arousing the anger of the population. The second arrest of Richard Choque Flores sparked controversy, as police officers and healthcare workers were punished for complicity with the offender. A new investigation revealed that Richard, who had been in prison for only 6 years for the murder of young Blanca Ruby Limachi, was released on probation by a judge on December 24, 2019, even though he was not entitled to it. His lawyers found a way to change this situation. They did not choose a legal strategy, but the path of corruption. They unscrupulously argued that Richard Choque Flores suffered from diseases that threatened his life in prison and that it would be better to keep him in a safe place. Dr. Freddie Time issued a false certificate to the defendant, diagnosing him with the following diseases. For this reason, he recommended a special medical treatment diet to prevent stomach cancer. 3 days later, just before Christmas, Judge Rafael Alcon responded to the request of Richard Choque's lawyers, who, in addition to handing over a certificate, gave him $3,000 and a bottle of whiskey as a bribe to think about the matter. Thus, Richard Flores was prematurely released on December 24, 2019. He returned to the house he shared with his mother and sister in El Alto and managed to reoffend, which satisfied him greatly. From his probation until his second arrest, Richard inflicted harm on at least 77 girls, including sexual violence and murder. The way he did this highlighted the vulnerability of the security forces. Once Richard returned to his comfortable place, he unleashed his method to catch new victims. Although he sometimes changed the scenes and the identity he presented, he followed the same script in all cases, leading him to contact his victim. Richard created fake social media profiles in which he pretended to be a police officer or a woman named Hyde MZ. Sometimes he posted job ads. In these cases, he used the profile of Hyde Mitza and thus gained the trust of other women. Richard exploited their financial vulnerability and posted an offer as an escort, stating that girls who wanted a good daily income in their spare time should write to him in private messages. The payment for services was hourly or daily. These posts were located in a group where people in the city of La Paz were looking for work. Other victims were invited by the alleged assistant to courier services, but when they arrived at the place they had been called to, they were shocked to find that a trap had been set for them. Similarly, he behaved with his police profile by placing suspicious substances in the rooms where women stayed, which led Richard to meet them in uniform, making them believe he was a member of the crime-fighting unit. In all cases, he ordered his victims to record a video addressed to their relatives, asking them to give him a certain amount of money. If they did not comply, he forced them to have sex with him and threatened to send them to prison for possession of controlled substances. When investigators discovered his method, they immediately linked him to the disappearance of the minors Iris and Lucy in 2021, wasted no time investigating the case, and prioritized it in this direction. The authorities met with Richard Choque to tell him the truth. Without resistance, the criminal admitted that he had indeed kidnapped and killed them. Security forces immediately went to his house, where a search was initiated, and the bodies of both girls were discovered. To everyone's surprise, they found something else. His cousin Fidel, who had been missing since 2011 and also had the misfortune of falling into his clutches, was buried in his yard, as his aunt suspected. As more than 70 complaints against him revealed, Richard Choque Flores was one of the most dangerous criminals in Bolivian history. Psychological and psychiatric examinations have shown that Richard has the typical personality of an asocial psychopath, lacking empathy, remorse, and a high recidivism rate for crimes. These are the characteristics that were identified during his first arrest, and that the judge ignored when he was released in 2019. Richard Choque Flores was sent back to prison and sentenced to the maximum penalty under Bolivian criminal law of 30 years for rape, extortion, and murder. As the investigation progressed and more truth came to light, the anger of the people grew. When it became known that Richard's mother and sister were accomplices in covering up his crimes, the neighbors did not have to wait long. They went to the house where the women still lived and made their resistance to their family clear by painting graffiti on the walls and even setting part of the house on fire. Moreover, on January 31st, just 1 week after the arrest, a mass procession took place through the streets of Bolivia, from the criminal's house to the courthouse, led by women expressing their resistance to male violence and corruption in the judiciary. Thousands marched, chanting that this would never have happened if he had not been released. One of the slogans they gathered around and made demands was the slogan that there is no justice for the poor, referring to the bribes received by government officials. These demonstrations took place in several cities across the country to demand judicial reform to regulate and guarantee the enforcement of sentences. Currently, Richard Choque Flores is serving his sentence, as are his accomplices, under the watchful eyes of a people who do not forget.